we're here to talk about King Lear.
Mhm.
Um, we worked on this play together basically exactly 4 years ago.
This time 4 years
Um,
ago.
yeah, yeah. I directed the show, and you
The
played the
king.
king, the king,
Good to be the king.
for the brief time that this
Mhm.
King Lear is
Mhm.
actually king in the play called
Mhm.
King Lear.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we might talk a little bit about that experience as we go through a couple of pieces. And I have some images from that production that we might have a look at. Um, Not all of them with you in your boxers, but most of them. My apologies in
Mm.
advance to you. Um, but before we jump in, I wonder, was there anything that surprised you about playing the part?
Well, the famous thing that they say about playing King Lear is by the time you're old enough to play King Lear, you're too old to play King Lear. In other words, he is a man at the end of his working life,
Mm-hmm.
but he has an awful lot to say and do in the play, so it needs an amount of stamina and an amount of recall of some difficult lines. Uh, we the version we did wasn't the entire play. We did a very, if I have to say, elegant edit, which concentrated on Lear and his daughters and Gloucester and his sons. So some of the rest of the play was stripped away. So perhaps it wasn't the marathon it has been for other actors of my age and older who've played the part, but it's a challenge, in the same way that Hamlet is a challenge, in the same way that Coriolanus is a challenge. It's a it's a physical, emotional, um, spiritual workout.
Yeah, yeah. And I kind of have a hope that we might get to do another one of these sessions where we might investigate this in detail. But I can only imagine he goes on such a journey, both
Mhm,
literally and
mhm,
emotionally and as a character. And I think in some ways it's one of the hardest plays to start as an actor,
yeah.
um, because you do this in some ways this kind of confounding thing right at the beginning,
Mhm,
which we're still hundreds of years later arguing about exactly why.
yeah.
Why does he do this? And that's something that we'll probably answer tonight. Um, but but uh, but Mark, Axis, let us do another session to just talk about Lear. There's so much to say about his journey. But yeah, and even though we stripped it back to just traverse everything that he goes through with his
Mhm,
daughters and with his life and with his
mhm.
sanity, and yeah, yeah, and it's an extraordinary play. Um, so tonight, I was just talking about what I'd like to do in another session looking at Lear. The reason we can't do that tonight is that we've got these three pieces of text in particular that we're going to look at that you'll read for us, and then
Right.
you and I will discuss. So we might just jump into the first of those.
Okay. Okay. So
Um,
this is Edmund in, where are we? Act one, scene two, three.
yeah, scene two. Yeah,
So
top of two.
basically, anyway, why don't I do it and then we'll decide what it is.
Very good.
Thou, nature, art my goddess. To thy law my services are bound. Wherefore should I stand in the plague of custom and permit the curiosity of nations to deprive me, for that I am some 12 or 14 moonshines lag of a brother? Why bastard? Wherefore base? when my dimensions are as well compact, my mind as generous, and my shape as true as honest madam's issue? Why brand they us with base, with baseness, bastardy, base, who in the lusty stealth of nature take more composition and fierce quality than doth within a dull, stale, tired bed, got to the creating of a whole tribe of fops got between asleep and wake? Well then, legitimate Edgar, I must have your land. Our father's love is to the bastard Edmund as to the legitimate. Fine word, legitimate. Well, my legitimate, if this letter speed and my invention thrive, Edmund the base shall top the legitimate. I grow, I prosper. Now, gods, stand up for bastards.
Yeah, lovely, lovely. So, would you say a couple of words about Edmund and where he is at this part of the play?
Well, defining him by that particular speech, I had the good fortune, the first time I appeared in Lear, I played the endlessly fascinating character of Oswald, who has everything wrapped up in him, comedy and tragedy, and is a bit of a nasty character too. But in that production, I had the good fortune to play alongside one of our most distinguished actors, Owen Roe, in the role of Edmund. And 2 years later, with the same company, we did Othello, and Owen played Iago. And the similarities between Edmund and Iago are fascinating in that they are, on the surface, the blackest of black villains who seem to be motivated throughout the play by nothing but bad, except that they take us into their confidence and explain from their point of view exactly why they're doing it. I've a theory. I don't know how well based it is, that Shakespeare was reasonably new at giving his villains three-dimensional characters and motivations. I think up to that, the baddie in the theater was there to be the baddie, to give the good people a hard time and not have much of a life of his own. Whereas Edmund's really interesting. He's smart. He's sexy. The Lear daughters, two of the three of them fall for him, and he can't understand why his father, who he feels he has a better relationship than his brother does, shouldn't ennoble him just because of the mere accident of the legality of his birth. And he has, like Iago, I guess, he has a bit of a chip on his shoulder about this, and decides to get his own back on the world.
Yeah, beautifully put. What a beautifully complex and comprehensive answer to that question. And, and you talk about that chip on the shoulder, and what Shakespeare does so beautifully in this speech, and it's something you brought out so beautifully, is that word base, which he then connects in, putting it in the same line as bastard, bastardy. We have base 3 times in one line. Mm-hmm. And, it's as you say, this, he's not just a baddie. Mm-hmm. He's someone, this idea that he's just a bastard, he's base. Mm. He's the opposite of the legitimate, as you also so beautifully brought out, Shakespeare bringing up this word over and over, the brother born into wedlock, through a random chance of timing, random chance of somebody being married to somebody else, and your whole life is different. Yeah.
Yes, and that your character is defined by the circumstances of your birth. not
Yeah.
by who you are,
Yeah.
what you add up to, but you're a bastard, so you're base. You're
And it's very, oh, sorry, excuse
you're
me.
low. You're at the
Yeah.
bottom.
Yes. Which is an interesting thing to think about in the context of the second word of this speech, nature.
Mm.
And so much of the play, characters are relating themselves to nature or appealing to nature, as well as to the gods, right? And the idea of what's natural,
Mm.
and is natural better than other ways that we might judge something or order our understanding of the world.
I'm not sure when it came into use, but the term a natural born son often referred to someone who's born outside of wedlock. So perhaps Shakespeare's playing on that in
Brilliant.
the invocation of nature at the beginning of the speech.
Very good. Very good. Brilliant. Brilliant. And what you talk about that idea of the baddies, and Shakespeare with Iago and with Edmund, Shakespeare reckoning with, how do I write a baddie who's still a baddie?
Yeah.
And he functions in the play, he drives things forward in such a way that has to do with antagonizing the good people. But I write him in such a way as, first of all, you could sit there and go, well, I'm not surprised you ended up like this.
Mm-hmm.
And also, maybe, probably not by the end of the play, but you could kind of go, I get why you'd want to get your own back. Maybe
Also,
not taking the, yeah, go ahead.
It just occurred to me that it's often said about 20th century music that the devil gets the best tunes. In Shakespeare, the devil often gets the best soliloquies. Both to just draw that parallel between Edmund and Iago, they are both black-hearted, but they are endlessly fascinating and, dare I say, attractive.
Absolutely. And it's actually kind of interesting when you think about, so we've got Edmund, and we've referred to this other brother, but we haven't, I don't think we've named him. We've got Edgar, the good guy, the legitimate son. And it's kind of funny that at the beginning, Edmund is the one who's compelling. Edmund is the one who turns to us and says, here's the deal. And Edgar is actually, he's kind of a fool. He's taken in by Edmund, who tricks him and kind of gives him a really fast talk and okay, I'll just follow what you do. And of course, Gloucester, their dad, gets tricked by Edmund, and he keeps Edgar and Gloucester apart. But then we do this flip where Edgar becomes the person who is speaking to us, who transforms, who becomes brave and daring and resourceful. And by the end, Edmund is almost, I mean, we see and hear he's preoccupied by his idea of his status and his nobility. And in some ways, we won't really get a chance to talk about the end of the play as such. But if you think about how things end up with him and him getting challenged by Edgar in disguise and everything else, Edmund is almost undone by his own preoccupation with his nobility, with his status.
Yes.
So it's almost like he becomes the fool.
Whereas, and we'll talk about this later with Lear, when Edgar has his status removed and becomes poor Tom, it's almost like he finds his own actual nobility. And, his relationship and what he does for his father and for Lear is far more noble than anything to do with his birthright.
Yes. And the resources that are the most valuable for him to put forward are the resources of heart, of ingenuity of the mind. They have nothing to do with capital, with money, with power,
with status.
With status. And I find, and we were talking about this before we came online, I really struggle as a director with the idea of bad characters, right? Like, I'm always like, but Edgar is, but Edmund is, he's had all these things against him. We open the play. This is scene 2 of Act 1. But in Act 1, his dad is just standing there chatting away about how he slept with Edmund's mother and ha ha ha, and they weren't married. I mean, of course I can understand. And so as a director, I'm always like, but they're all justified. And I remember having a conversation with Brett, the dramaturg who worked on King Lear, and I remember having a conversation with him about the characters like Edmund or like Shylock, who again I think you could really see a lot of reasons why he might do what he does in Merchant of Venice. And I remember Brett saying, but at the end of the day, they're villains. And not villains because the world is black and white and you're good or bad, but they have a job to do in the play.
Exactly. It would be very dull without them. The good characters would have a very, very easy time of it.
It's like, I don't know if you ever do this, but sometimes if I'm teaching or something like that, I go, listen, if you all agreed, like you'd wrap up the scene, the play would be over, the play would be 5 minutes, but no, we have the people who throw the spanners in the works. We might press on painfully short because we could talk about this for the whole time. And we're jumping way ahead to one of the most iconic sequences in the play. You might talk us in here.
Okay, so Lear, as we know, has divided his kingdom and decided that his domestic arrangements are going to be staying with one of his 2 still in favor daughters each month. But this goes entirely awry. He has an enormous row with both of them, stomps off and ends up on a blasted heath in a storm. Blow, winds, and crack your cheeks. Rage, blow. You cataracts and hurricanos, spout till you have drenched our steeples, drown the cocks. You sulphurous and thought-executing fires, vaunt couriers of oak-cleaving thunderbolts, singe my white head. And thou, all shaking thunder, smite flat the thick rotundity of the world, crack nature's molds and German spill at once that make ingrateful man. Rumble thy belly full, spit, fire, spout, rain. Nor rain, wind, thunder, fire are my daughters. I tax not you, you elements, with unkindness. I never gave you kingdom, called you children. You owe me no subscription. Then let fall your horrible pleasure. Here I stand, your slave, a poor, infirm, weak, and despised old man. But yet I call you servile ministers that have with 2 pernicious daughters joined your high-engendered battles against a head so old and white as this. Oh, 'tis foul. No, I will be the pattern of all patience. I will say nothing. Let the great gods that keep this dreadful pother o'er our heads find out their enemies now. Tremble, thou wretch that hast within thee undivulged crimes, unwhipped of justice. Hide thee, thou bloody hand, thou perjured and thou simular man of virtue that art incestuous. Caitiff to pieces shake that under covert and convenient seeming hast practiced on man's life. Close pent-up guilts rive your concealing countenance and cry these dreadful summoners grace. I am a man more sinned against than sinning. Oh. My wits begin to turn. Come on, my boy. How dost thou, my boy? Art cold? I am cold myself. Where is this straw, my fellow? The art of our necessities is strange that can make vile things precious. Come, your hovel. Poor fool and knave, I have one part in my heart that's sorry yet for thee.
Hmm. Hmm. Beautiful, Jonathan. Thank you.
Telescoped storm. We packed it all into one speech. There are interruptions, but you get the various shades and flavors of it.
And that's it, isn't it? There are so many shades and flavors.
Mm.
People think about this. They think about Lear, and if you don't know about a lot about Lear, you might think about this man in the storm raging, and of course, even what that means
Mm.
is so complicated, and
Mm.
it's a big thing, but it's also a very personal,
Yeah,
intimate thing, isn't it?
yeah, it is. I know we've talked before that as stage effects get more complex and bigger, and directors are tempted to literally throw the kitchen sink at the storm scene, you find yourself often having to compete with your own storm, where I think what Shakespeare was at was showing us a storm that's happening inside the man, that basically thunder and lightning is going off inside his head as everything that he knew of his world until this advanced age has collapsed, and he's left almost naked with a fool in thunder and lightning. And yes, the weather is horrible, but the injustice of how his world has turned out as he sees it is even more horrible. The gods have done this to us. I mean, we touched on it already, but the place of the gods in Lear's world, they are equals. They're contemporaries. They are people who, no, maybe that's pushing it a bit far, but they are certainly people who he can call upon with authority. Under the divine right of kings, they've made him king. Therefore, if he has a request, if he has an order, he feels entitled to tell the gods what they should do, how they should do their job. So that's where this scene starts, is him telling the gods, go on, do your worst. And yet it couldn't be as bad as what my daughters have done to me. How my daughters have unleashed a storm on me that mean I now own nothing and am nothing by my previous definition of what my life is.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Based upon my previous sense of myself, I am nothing. I have no boxes ticked.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is where I think once or twice Lear has used the word old in relation to himself very soon before this. But really, this is where Lear first starts to speak about himself as old, isn't it? My white head.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very different
Infirm,
conception.
weak, all the things that he would never have admitted of himself before. But when you're, I guess, and this is Lear's journey, he is brought low, and then in the next section of the play, he is brought out of himself entirely. His wits depart him so that he can manage his new situation, but it's only then that he can find himself again.
Yeah. Yeah. And God, there's so much to say about that. But one thing I did want to touch on is that you, in regards to the stagecraft element and the different ways in which it could be put on stage, our entire storm came out of a boombox, which you controlled.
So I was clutching an old 80s style cassette playing boombox, and the storm was coming out of that. It seemed a better shape to the storm within. So instead of up there, I was in here. And we even got to the point where when the storm became too much for Lear, when his inner turmoil was too great, I ripped the batteries out of the boombox and threw them away in an attempt to stop the storm inside.
It was such a I think back on that, and it was such a delight to discover how we were going to do that part of the play, because it's a real example. People think about plays and a moment like that, and they think, look at what the director decided to do, and it couldn't be further from the truth. That moment was such a collaboration between, Shakespeare was in the room, and you and myself and Hannah, our designer, Hannah Bow, and it's something like that, and a prop that was so right for the scene, that helped us unpack the scene by even playing around with things like play buttons and pause buttons and batteries, that they helped us realize this is where Lear takes out the batteries, even though Shakespeare didn't even know what a boombox or batteries was, but it was what he was writing into it.
Also, as I recall, what happened was that once the batteries came out, the storm kind of spread out through the whole theatre.
Yeah.
So you suddenly realized he wasn't in control of his own storm anymore. It had control of him.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a real, I'm often, as a director, I'm like, I focus on the acting, I focus on the text. I can often feel very intimidated by stuff like AV, like sound design. And that was a real moment for me where I learned about how, when you really listen to what a text needs, the sound design, the technical elements, they're the dramaturgical forces that shine the light on the text, that we really were able to, to articulate on another level. Lear's relationship with, is this my storm, or is it something far beyond me?
Yeah, it's about control. It's Lear losing control, which as a king he's had all his life. And even in calling upon the gods, he flatters himself that he can control the gods. But guess what? He can't.
Yeah. Well, as we just did with the last speech, I would love to just keep talking about this. But we had one, we had said, we might look at this if we have time, but really we both said we have to look at this. So we're actually moving back in time in the play. And you've already touched on the scene where this takes place, but perhaps you might speak to this moment before the speech.
In Lear's solution to his domestic arrangements after the banishment of Cordelia, he decides he's going to, as I say, spend 1 month with one daughter and 1 month with the other. He's going to go around with 100 knights and all that entails in terms of upset and upheaval in the domestic arrangements. And of course, it's a disaster, and Lear's knights are causing trouble. So the two daughters, for the first time in the play, start working together. And suddenly they're saying, no, not 100, 50. And Lear says, 50? Well, I'm going back to your sister, and at least she let me have 100. And suddenly it's going 50, 25, 5. And they're saying, why do you need knights when you can use our servants? Why do you need even one? And Lear says, reason not the need. Our basest beggars are in the poorest things superfluous. Allow not nature more than nature needs. Man's life's as cheap as beasts. Thou art a lady. If only to go warm were gorgeous, why nature needs not what thou gorgeous wert, which scarcely keeps thee warm. But for true need, oh, you heavens, give me that patience, patience I need. You see me here, you gods, a poor old man, as full of grief as age, wretched in both. If it be you that stir these daughters' hearts against their father, fool me not so much to bear it tamely. Touch me with noble anger, and let not women's weapons, water drops, stain my man's cheeks. No, you unnatural hags, I will have such revenges on you both that all the world shall... I will do such things. What they are yet I know not, but they shall be the terrors of the earth. You think I'll weep? No, I'll not weep. I have full cause of weeping. But this heart shall break into 100,000 flaws, or ere I'll weep. Oh, fool. I shall go mad.
Oh. There's so many places to begin with this speech. I think something I said to you when we were talking about this before. You know, again, when we talk about Edmund and we say, okay, he's a bad character, we can see why he's like that, but we can see all the complexity, and you can see from the daughter's side. Shakespeare does a great job of letting us understand why the daughters are driven demented by having the father bring all these knights, and the guys are disrespectful and they drink, and like they're a total nuisance, all these knights that King Lear is insisting on having around and all this. And so the daughters, from their perspective, are being very reasonable and saying, you don't need these people. And you don't need this, you don't need this. Why do you even need one servant? When you come to each of our houses, we'll have loads of people to look after you. And that, oh, reason not the need. That line to me always strikes me as it's such a family member to another family member line. To say, it's not just about function. You're hurting me. It's not even about, am I being reasonable? Like, can you just indulge me? I just need this. And I need this, but I need it on a non-practical level.
Yeah. It's not about the knights. It's about respecting me still, even though I'm not the king anymore, respecting who I used to be. It's these, and it's also, it's what I asked for. It was the one condition. And now you're saying no. So yes, it has a great domestic undertow. And he realizes he's losing control of the situation. And the last thing he's going to do is cry in front of his daughters.
Yeah. And you have that, don't you? First of all, we have him calling up to his pals, the gods again, right? You see me here, oh, you gods, a poor old man. But then, and let not women's weapons, water drops, stain my man's cheeks. And I wonder, would you read those next couple of lines? We can talk about them more closely. Just from, sorry.
You unnatural hags. I will have such revenges on you both, that all the world shall... I will do such things. What they are yet I know not, but they shall be the terrors of the earth.
Lovely. What? Yeah.
impotence of the empty threat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's
And
going
yeah,
to settle their hash, but he's not quite sure, with no knights and a fool, and basically they've got him over a barrel, and he's going to do something, but he hasn't a clue what he's going to do or how he's going to do it.
and we often have, in comparisons to Trump, which we might touch on a bit later, you always pull up that quote as a possible Trump tweet.
Yeah, exactly. I think I actually have done it at times when he was making empty threats about things. I put up that quote in all caps because it really does sound like Trump. You know, they're going to be the best kind of things. What they are, I know not, but they'll be the wonders of the earth.
Yeah, and again, you have this duality of like, you can imagine the daughter standing there being like, "Oh Jesus, this blowhard." What's the line? Now I shouldn't have put myself on this precipice because I'm not going to quote it correctly, and I won't remember which daughter it is. But when the daughter said, "I gave you all, and in good time you gave it."
Yeah.
That you can imagine those daughters have been putting up with this behavior, and here they have it again. And you can totally understand why they'd go, do we really want to spend another how many years of our lives putting up with this guy? And yet on the other hand, you go, that's so human to be flailing against.
And we may talk about this later too, but it focuses in very much on the child-parent relationship. I've done so much for you, nobody told you to. This demand for gratitude on the one hand and for independence on the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And a word that I think is so appropriate to Shakespeare almost all of the time, it's so primal. It's the fight, as you said, it's not about the knights. That's probably one of the most common principles amongst couples and family therapists, right? It's not about the blank. It's about what it means. Yeah.
It's not who takes the bins out. It's
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it is, we could absolutely spend an entire session just looking at that scene. Because the way that Shakespeare breaks down the adult children's maths, calculations of what is even possible in terms of the capacity of their living spaces, with all these guys showing up, and the father wanting them, having these different kinds of needs, all of these different arguments happening at once, in the same way as if your parent needed to move into your house, you'd have to figure out where all their stuff went.
Yes.
Or you'd have to say to them, I can't take all your stuff.
And your dog.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's criminally short amount of time that we've spent on each of these, but I know we have a little bit, we have a couple of questions that came through on Instagram earlier, and there might be some coming through on Facebook now as well. And by the way, there will be another AxisHacks conversation with the two of us about Lear in the near future. So the gods have spoken, and it will be done. So we'll be able to go into more depth.
We'll be talking about, yet we know not, but it'll be the wonders of the earth.
We will do such things in that conversation.
Exactly.
I might, for a little, hopefully I don't bring something up that's scandalous, but I might, for a laugh, pull up a couple of photos from the production that we did.
I'm very proud of
Oh, Where are they? Can you see that?
I can see that.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. That's Jonathan, as you can see, with a lot more facial hair, and that's the wonderful Breffney Holohan in the foreground, playing Cordelia, the youngest daughter, who we really haven't talked about very much.
No.
But
just so people know that the crown that I'm wearing was more of a joke crown, in that that we played around with a bit in the first scene, the division of the kingdom. The magnificent red jacket with the fur collar, however, is what Lear wore to start the show, and I felt very regal in that. As you can see, Breffney's look as Cordelia was quite different.
yeah, and I mean, like, we could spend a whole session talking about all the different kinds of choices that were made in that show with casting and the concept. But the thing that I will say about the concept is, you'll notice, those who are looking at these for the first time, you'll notice that a lot of it is quite stripped back, and the production itself, the idea of it was that it was a group of actors preparing in the middle of rehearsals for a production of King Lear. So they're reading scripts, and the play kind of takes over. So next, what have we got next? Oh, here's Lear and Gloucester in the storm, with this magical umbrella that our designer Hannah, did she put it? I can't remember. Did she put the LED lights in herself? It might have been the Wonders of Amazon.
I'm not sure who did it, but it was magical, because Simon Curry, who was playing Gloucester, his first appearance in the storm was in the distance, in the darkness, and all you saw was this light coming down from the inside of the umbrella. It was a great coup de théâtre.
It really was. Some beautiful design choices made in this. And again, it's we think about theater being executed in action on the stage. You see how an intelligently chosen prop or set piece or costume piece can open up the play, not only for the audience, but for the people involved in making it, for the director and for the performers. It's beautiful. And here you are talking with Mark Fitzgerald, who played Edgar, the good son, the legitimate son, the ill-fated son at the top, at least, who at this stage has put himself in disguise. And he's playing Tom of Bedlam, basically a homeless, mentally ill person. And he's got a disposable rain poncho on, which I think one lasted us the entire run.
It
Mark
did
was
just
very
about,
good,
because Mark acted very vigorously in it.
As we talked about, this was a much more stripped back production.
Yeah.
So we had a much smaller cast, and a lot of the scenes we stripped back because we only had a couple of people involved in the action of the scene. So this is Mae Fitzgerald, who's playing Regan, and we have Simon Curry again playing Gloucester, and this is the blinding of Gloucester. And so again, you see, rather than trying to enact the eyes being gouged out, Maeve took red fake blood on her hands and placed them in Simon's eye sockets and brought them down. And again, we haven't gone into this hugely, but it helped her, and she really developed this whole vocabulary of the eye gouging. It helped explore the ambivalence of the two sisters, and specifically of Regan, in the evil acts that she's involved with, but also the fact that she has humanity there as well. She's a human. She's ended up where she is because she's human, because she's fallible. In the play, she's an evil character. She does that job, but there's lots of complicated things that lead to that. I thought they did
another thing I'll say about that is, by a symbolic rather than a practical blinding, I think we avoided an awful lot of unintentional humor that sometimes comes in with with plums and grapes that are used to signify eyes. There was nobody laughing at that blinding.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the great things about theater, right? It's I always think about what the great playwright Tony Kushner wrote in the introduction to his play Angels in America, or his two plays. And there's an angel who comes through the ceiling, and he said it should not be magical. You should be able to see the wires. And I think it's a wonderful principle for us to remember about theater, that the audience, the jig is up. We all know it's fake. So we can all agree to creative, non-literal solutions to moments such as this. We all know his eyes are still there. We can see his eyes. But the gesture and the impact of it can be even greater than if it looked real. Yeah.
One of my favorite moments in the play. This is Lear waking up from his madness, having been rescued by his younger daughter. At that stage in Hannah's design, the stage was getting increasingly draped with white material, and Breffney had on her a sort of a white diaphanous skirt, so it looks like we're in the Alps. But yeah, it's a lovely moment when Lear pieces together his mind again and establishes that he's not dreaming and that it is his daughter.
And this is something, when you've mentioned several times about Lear's mind and sanity or insanity or something else, and maybe something we'll spend more time on at another point with these sessions, because what sanity is, what clarity is, what being in control of your mind is something that transforms over the course of the play, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what it means to truly see. Yeah.
As I think I mentioned earlier, I think that Lear's madness is in fact a defense mechanism. His conscious mind shuts down so as not to have to deal with the enormity of what's happened to him, and he's left with this childlike view on the world that kind of gets him through.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. Which I think we can really see in this picture. And it's such a beautiful thing that happens with the flip of this relationship between Lear and his youngest daughter, casting her out, leaving her with nothing at the beginning of the play, and how they both journey to be at this end point together. Okay, well, that's a couple of images there.
Little voyage down memory lane.
Yeah. And I should have said, it's such another magical thing is that skirt that Breffney had on in the last photo had fairy lights in it. Oh, so magic.
Yep.
Magic. Okay, so let us get down to a couple of questions, and then we will I will let you go. We will let our captive audience go. So the first question that came through on Instagram was, how would King Lear, and for the day that's in it, it's timely, how would King Lear compare to Donald Trump as President of the United States?
Well, I don't know whether you saw in today's New York Times, the theatre critic Jesse Green had a whole piece about now's the time to stop comparing Trump to various Shakespeare plays, because it's been a trope the whole way through. To take the man's flaws and absurdities and almost ennoble them by giving them a Shakespearean resonance. That said, Lear is one of the ones that has come up most commonly. I know there have been productions of Julius Caesar where we've seen a very Trumpian Caesar, but I think there are certainly echoes, particularly I'd say almost exclusively in the first half of the play. Um,
Mm.
Starting with the desire for public pronouncements of affection and loyalty. I think of
Mm.
Trump's first cabinet meeting where he went around the table and every member of the cabinet had to say how great they thought he was and what a good job he was doing already before he'd done anything, which has huge echoes of the first scene where the daughters have to give the reasons why or the amount that they love their father. Similarly,
Yeah.
the banishment of Kent for finding fault with Lear is
Yes.
very Trumpian, in that sort of naysayers were not welcome at court, only people who agreed. There we've already touched on the I will do such things, what they are yet I know not, but they shall be the wonders of the earth, which I think is very, very Lear. And there was one other, oh yeah, his definition of himself as a man more sinned against than sinning. Lear's definition sounds quite Trumpian too, that sort of dying fall at the end of every line. And he talks about how horrible people, say his thing about his treatment in his first year being the worst scandal ever in American politics. So yes, there are distinct echoes of Trump in Lear in the first half of the play. The difference being that so far, anyway, we haven't seen the scales fall from Donald Trump's eyes in the way they fall from Lear's. The redemption arc isn't there.
This is absolutely it. And it's actually like, I feel like as a person, and a person who's worked in theater or been involved in theater my whole life, theater has taught me to relentlessly believe that all people are full of universes and full of possibility and transcendent potential. And having observed him over the last 4 years, and especially after having read Mary Trump's book, his niece's book, in which he gave such a forensic account of how he was programmed by his awful father. I actually don't know whether Donald Trump is capable of change in the way, as you say, that Lear is. Yeah. And it's, I think it's a tragic thing. He's a person who was broken and made incomplete by how he was raised and took no responsibility to get any different.
It also shows how the Shakespearean equivalences only take us so far. Shakespeare was a much better dramatist than life is. So we're always going to come up short.
Absolutely. Although I will say, and we were chatting about this last week, and I've been so tempted to tweet this out, but you made a beautiful offering of a brilliant idea for a Trump-centered scene in Lear, which is Lear and the Fool out on the heath as Trump and Giuliani as the Fool.
Still spouting his and this I love the character of the Fool in Lear, and my favorite playing of it is in the BBC Shakespeare version by Frank Middlemass, where you get the impression of a clapped out music hall comedian who was funny when Lear was a child, and Lear has kept him around to remind him of those happy days, but nobody finds the Fool's jokes funny anymore. And Giuliani's a bit like that. They used to be colossi in New York back in the 80s and 90s, but now nobody's laughing at Rudy's jokes or lawsuits. No, they're laughing at his lawsuits.
Okay, I've just gotten in a question that's just been asked on Facebook from Neve. In broad terms, Lear can be played either as having already entered into mental decline at the beginning of the play, or as only doing so in response to his daughter's actions. Which way did Jonathan play the character? And how does it affect the interpretation of the play? Okay, okay.
That's
Yeah,
very
really.
interesting
Yeah.
because yes, I have absolutely seen it done, and I have uh, what Niamh outlines first. So that the daughter's um, anger, discomfort, willing need to manage the situation arising from his irrational behavior, and so the uh, the first scene, the division of the kingdom, does on the surface, and certainly to a modern audience, seem like a mad thing to do, if you pardon the use of the loose use of the word mad. So yes, that and funnily enough, it's not a version that we went for. Now I was a younger man then, but I think we decided not to play him decrepit or mentally weakened at the start. So yes, it was not just the actions of the daughters, but the sudden realization that without the trappings he amounted to nothing,
Yeah.
and that his whole world and system of being had broken down, and that's what unhinges him. So that's the way we went, but come back to me in another 4 years and we might have a dodderier Lear from the start.
Well, it's funny because what you say, it just made me think of one of my favorite lines. And this is a question I don't think we'll actually get to today, but there was a question about our favorite lines or speeches or whatever. This isn't the full thing. I might read the full thing next time we meet. But when he says, "Oh, I have ta'en too little care of this."
Yes. Yeah.
And there's so many levels of resonance of that. But it's exactly what you say. I have not built up the muscles to understand myself as anything but center of the universe, powerful person, a commander.
Self-knowledge has not been a necessary skill for Lear.
Yeah.
Other people are there to do his bidding without him having to second guess himself. So
yes.
Self-knowledge only comes when all of that is stripped away.
Yes, absolutely. And excuse me for my sudden shocked expression. There are hijinks happening with my cats. Somebody just surprised me, so apologies for the sudden. Right. Anyway, absolutely. And it's an interesting question then about how does mental illness and how we understand mental illness now, how it would have been understood then, its relationship with this whole nature, with the gods, all of these powers that are external to ourselves and our minds, which I'm making a lot of promises for a lot of futures, but again, something that would be great to discuss further.
Yes. Yeah.
But how much can we also look at what happens to a human mind or a human psyche when the structures of how I understand myself, the world, everything fall away?
Yeah.
And what's left and what happens? Yeah.
And, is, again, the contrast with the fool. Is the fool someone whose world as he understood it has crumbled away, and he's left hanging on to Lear for dear life as the only way to escape beating, to being kicked out of doors?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's just one other line that I wanted to pull up that, again, I think is an interesting one in relation to this. And again, you could look at taking either way. After the whole rigmarole with the professing the love and the dividing of the kingdom, towards the end of the first scene, when the two elder daughters get the first chance to speak on their own together, and they kind of go, what was that? We got to talk. Like, Dad's, like, okay, we made out well, that's fine, but we got to check in about what's actually going on here. And that line where Regan says, "'Tis the infirmity of his age, yet he hath ever but slenderly known himself."
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, you could take that so many ways. The way we're just discussing of, do you truly know yourself, or do you only know yourself in relation to your power and what you can do because of your status? Or is it slenderly known himself because his relationship with sanity is...
There are two playable thoughts in that one line, two completely different ways to go with the character, or maybe a blend, I don't know. But yes, I mean, Neve's question has sparked in my mind the notion of that challenge of, and as I say, I've seen it done, and it'd be an interesting thing to try. That in the middle of this magisterial behavior in the first scene, there are very visible chinks in the mental armor. That he loses his place. He's if not quite repeating himself, certainly not in command of his brief, or as in command as he thinks he is. So
The first Lear that I ever saw, I think, was when I was about 12 or 13 not in Hartford, but in Connecticut, where I'm from. And it took place in a mental institution. And the storm scene, I will never forget. It was one of the most thrilling things I'd ever seen at that stage. Lear is wheeled in a humongous laundry basket, an industrial size, going down to the basement with the huge drums washing all the sheets. And he bursts up out of it, sending sheets and pillowcases flying up into the air. And that's the storm.
Wow.
And again, one that was very much rooted in an existential, essential way with the question of sanity. I'm aware that we're a little after 8 p.m., so we might, I haven't gotten the hook yet, but maybe that's, I don't want to stop. I have so many other Post-it notes for us to talk about, and I know you have so many Post-it notes of the mind and everywhere else, but maybe we should save that hunger and appetite for our next Axis hack.
Absolutely. This is only the end of Act 3. There's more to come.
Well, so I'll just say a general housekeeping note that there's much more to come from AxisHacks. Mark and other members of the team at Axis as well will be hosting some different chats, be some touching on poetry, and as well as a vast variety of other topics that will be announced soon. But I thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and thank you so much to Jonathan.
Thank you, Aoife.
It's been a pleasure. All right.